them here on all these sagittal sections. Now the midbrain is in red, and you can see the pons in green, blue, and then the medulla oblongata. So if you look at it from an anterior view, you're going to see these little ball structure, or the my brain straight. The posterior view, you're going to see these little circular structures on the midbrain. And then when you look at it from the anterior view, so this is how you're going to know if it's anterior, posterior. The little circular structures on the midbrain, and then the structure of the pons. It looks kind of like a baby's butt, and the pyramids of the medulla oblongata. So if you want to tell whether it's anterior or posterior, then you're looking at the pons and the medulla oblongata for the anterior, and to distinguish posterior, that's from the midbrain. Okay, and it'll be more apparent as we move through here. Okay, so I am separating everything as we go through each of these structures all through the brain. Because we know that nervous tissue is just pieces and parts of neurons. Okay, so white matter, remember, are the axons, all bundled up, myelinated. The gray matter are the dendrites and cell bodies. Okay, so this would probably be like your third page, right? So now you're just going to look at the medulla oblongata. What does it look like? What's its function? What kind of structures does it contain? Okay, so thinking about the white matter, especially these structures that are below, right, the brain. I always think about motor. Our motor originates in the primary motor, in the cerebrum. And then those axons have to extend down to get through to the spinal cord. So they're going to go through all of these lower structures. And so they just get named there. When they go through each of the structures, they get different names. Okay? So in the medulla oblongata, the white matter, we're going to see basically where they cross the corticospinal tracts. So remember, the corticospinal tracts are the motor tracts that go to skeletal muscle. So they're going to decussate here at the medulla oblongata. Okay? And that structure is called a pyramid. Okay, so when you hear the word pyramids, that's medulla oblongata. So on your page where you just have medulla oblongata, you just want to write really big, pyramids. Okay, and you'll see this on the anterior side. What the pyramids are just the corticospinal tracts coming from the cerebrum, the axons of those upper motor neurons, and they cross there.
Decussate.
And decussate. So the upper motor neurons, axons, coming down, crossing, and then continuing. That's everything on the left side there. Remember, we have the lateral tracts and the anterior tracts. So I just said basically, it's Grand Central Station, or the somatic upper motor neuron tracts. Okay, then the gray matter, these are huge. It's the cardiovascular center and the respiratory center. So in other words, these nuclei in the cardiovascular center are going to extend to, one, the SA node, the sinoatrial node, the pacemaker for the heart. So now the heart has its own pacemaker. It doesn't need this input. The heart will beat on its own without any input from the central nervous system. But the central nervous system can moderate it, right? It can either increase the heart rate or decrease it through these. So those neurons that will do that start here. They also extend to the muscle cells in the heart to modify their force of contraction, right? So they can create a stronger force of contraction. Okay, and those neurons are part of the autonomic nervous system. Motor neurons, the autonomic nervous system. So these are both motor neurons, This is autonomic, this is somatic, goes to skeletal muscle. The respiratory, same thing, it makes sure that we have our proper ventilation rate. It's about 12 breaths per minute. And it also ensures that we have a really smooth transition between our inhale and our exhale. Okay, this is why you can't have a strong force to the blow to the back of the head. That's why it can result in death, because this is where you have your cardiovascular and respiratory center. It's basically our basic functions. Okay, so these are just pictures of that. All right, so you can see here, these are the pyramids, so this would be the anterior view. So these structures right here are called pyramids, right? And it's just this. It's the axons of these upper motor neurons. So right here at the medulla oblongata is where they decussate. So these are the pyramids. Okay, so pyramids, medulla oblongata, corticospinal tracts, they all go together. All those words. This is where the cardiovascular centers are, right? So I'm just kind of showing in color, just because these are nuclei. These are just kind of areas in there. You don't have to know this, like where they are, right? But basically, we kind of show where it's divvied up, where that new nervous tissue, the receptive regions, where those neurons are located, those parts of the neurons are located. Okay, so in that respect, what we just looked at, we can say two functions for the medulla oblongata, right? It's where our cardiovascular center is, our respiratory center is. So it's involved in controlling our heart rate and the force of contraction of cardiac muscle, so our blood pressure, essentially, and our breathing. Okay, and here's another one. So the medulla oblongata plays a role in learning new motor skills. Okay, because of this nucleus that's contained within it. Okay, it's going to receive information, right, about movement along with the cerebellum. And the red nucleus, and from the cerebral cortex. So these white matters are the axons of neurons that are bringing information here that help us to learn new motor skills. Remember, I had that chart up that said you have this idea of moving, and then the cerebellum gets the plan, and then you move, and then you get feedback, and then it goes over and over again until you learn the skill of movement. So this is part of that process. So the olivary nucleus is receiving information from these areas about movement and processing it, and then feeding information back so that we can learn that skill of movement. So I'm just showing you again, you don't have to know this, I'm just showing you how this tissue's divvied up. Right, so we have the olivary nucleus, here's our cardiovascular center, respiratory center. Another function. So we have controlling blood pressure and breathing. We have learning skills movement with the olivary nucleus. And now we have processing sensory information. We already looked at this, right? Remember the posterior column about information about touch, vibration. Remember that? Where we have our first order neuron that comes in. Their axons are part of the posterior columns. They go to the medulla oblongata. Remember, and then we said they either synapse with the cuneate nucleus or the gracilis. And so that's where the second order neuron was. So the second order neuron starts in one of these two nuclei and then goes to the thalamus and decussates, remember?
Is that when we talked about when you were saying that, like if you step on something,
Right
your
here.
brain reacts to it?
Well, that was a reflex, but
Okay.
this is it, remember? So this is for, proprioception, oh, it's on the side right here. So we have our touch. This is the first order neuron. See how its axon extends up as part of the posterior column, right? And then it's gonna go to the medulla oblongata. And here's the two different nuclei in the medulla oblongata. So this one here is the second order. So basically, those nuclei are important in processing sensory information because that's where the second order neuron starts. And then the medial lemniscus is the axons of the second order neuron.
What is the part that you talked about before when you said your brain actually recognizes it before you even
Yeah,
do
that's a
it?
reflex, it's
Okay.
kind of reflex.
Okay.
Okay, so we can add another function, it's a role in processing sensory. Because this is where the second order neurons begin. Okay, so just again showing where those are. Okay, and yet another one. Autonomic reflexes. Okay, so we had controlling blood pressure and breathing, learning new skills, that's the olivary nucleus, motor skills. And then we had processing sensory, pressure, touch, vibration, proprioception. That's cuneate and gracilis, it's where the second order neurons start. And now we can add this one, controlling autonomic reflexes. So this is the reflex centers for vomiting, for swallowing, also called deglutition, sneezing, coughing, and hiccuping. So these are all just ways to either clear our respiratory tract or clear our GI tract and swallow. Okay, then receptive regions for our ability to taste, to hear, and balance. So our receptors for taste come here, that information, our auditory information comes here, pre-processed, and for balance. Now this is important, especially for lab. This is the origin of cranial nerves 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So if you're looking for these in lab to identify them, if you know where the medulla oblongata is, these extend off from the medulla oblongata. This one is actually shared by the pons. So where the pons and medulla oblongata meet, you'll find 8. Then 9, 10, 11, and 12 are extensions off the medulla oblongata. So have you worked with the cranial nerves yet? Starting to memorize them? So you need to have Roman numeral with the name. Okay, 1 through 12, there's 12 of them. Cranial nerves are not like spinal nerves in the sense where they're always mixed, right? Where
Right.
spinal nerve always has sensory and motor. Cranial nerves are different. They can have just sensory, they can contain just motor neurons, or they can have both. Okay, so there's 2 mnemonics that you have to learn. One for the names. So there's some in the book, but if you go online, there's plenty ranging from G-rated to X-rated. You can pick a mnemonic that you want. In the book, it's O once one takes the anatomy final. Very good vacations are heavenly. And then then you need a mnemonic to know if it contains motor, sensory, or both. Some say money matters, but my brother says big brains matter more. Right? B is both, M is motor, S is sensory. So before final, you have to memorize those. Okay? So this is just looking at the inferior part of the brain. So again, this is the midbrain. This big baby's butt is the pons. And then you have the medulla oblongata.
Period.
So this is what I mean. If you go to 8, see how 8 is shared kind of, it's right at the border between the pons and the medulla oblongata. Then so you have 8, 9, 10, and then we have 11 and 12. Okay, so for this purposes of class, you're not gonna have to know where they are. Just the name that's associated with this Roman numeral, whether it's sensory or both, and that's it. Okay, for the lab, you have to be able to find it. All right, that's it for the medulla oblongata. So new page. Still on the brainstem. Pons just means bridge. This is the baby's butt. Okay, if you look at it from the front, you'll see the pontine nuclei. You'll see how it's connected to the cerebellum. So there's lots of tracks going from the pons to the cerebellum. And the pontine nuclei is a relaying station for that information. In other words, it receives information and then it's going to send information out. So all of that reflects the pons' role in making our skeletal muscle movements efficient. Okay, we're going to see the ascending and descending tracks because they have to get through there to get up and down. And now we can see, okay, more cranial nerves. Now 5, 6, 7, and 8. If you need to find those, you can look at the pons. Right, I have that here. 5 is the big one, trigeminal. We've already looked at that for what was part of our sensory pathway. Right, 5, 6, 7, and we just looked at 8. So here's the pons. 5, 6, 7, 8. And then there's also a respiratory group here as well. So this is this transverse section through the pons. You can see the fourth ventricle, because remember we said that was between the pons and the cerebellum. You can see the pontine nuclei. These are all the corticospinal tracts that go through. You can see the trigeminal, cranial nerve 5. And then the pontine respiratory group as well. That helps in controlling, just smoothing out our breathing. Okay, so that's the pons. So for the pons, it helps in movement. See the origination of 5, 6, 7, and 8 cranial nerves, and it smooths out our breathing. Also, the pons is located, or the fourth ventricle is located between the pons and the cerebellum. Okay, lastly, this is the last one in the brainstem, and we'll take a little break, just gonna move around. Okay, again, this is looking at the posterior. So this is the midbrain. So the biggest thing you can see from the posterior is the tectum. Okay, so the tectum is these 4 structures. And it's the 2 spheres or round structures on the top are the superior colliculi, and the 2 on the bottom are the inferior colliculi. All together, that's the tectum. Okay, so parts of the midbrain, we have the aqueduct that passes through it, connecting the third to the fourth ventricle. 2 cranial nerves, 3 and 4. Our white matter are the cerebral peduncles. So peduncle is just a specific name for a tract. So we're going to see axons from the corticospinal tract that are going through there, from the corticobulbar tracts that head to the medulla oblongata, and then the ones that go to the pons. So these are just, right, upper motor neurons passing through. Here's the tectum. The 2 round spheres on the top are the superior colliculi. This is important in our not only visual reflexes, but what you do when you read, right? Tracking. You're reading from left to right. You're using those nuclei. Inferior colliculi are auditory reflexes, right? Movement in relation to hearing the sound, right? You're already moving, hear something loud, you're moving towards it before you even realize it. Okay, 2 big, huge, important areas of gray matter. The substantia nigra and the red nuclei. The substantia nigra secrete dopamine. Right, this is the problem with Parkinson's. These people have issues with their substantia nigra, and these cells are not secreting dopamine. Dopamine is responsible for inhibiting the inhibitor for movement, right? So you can initiate movement easily, you can terminate movement easily, so we have controlled, smooth movement. The red nuclei, it looks red because it has these iron-containing pigments. And these are areas that are going to receive information from both the cerebrum about movement and the cerebellum about how we moved. So these red nuclei and substantia nigra are both involved in controlling muscle movements. Substantia nigra is involved in, because it releases dopamine, which goes to the corpus striatum, that's part of the basal nuclei, and inhibits the inhibitor. The red nuclei is involved in the plan, right? Knowing the plan from the cortex, sending it to the cerebellum, and then receiving input about that movement. So they're located here. This is a transverse section through the midbrain. So you can see the red nuclei here, and then the substantia nigra here. And here we can see all the peduncles, right? These contain upper motor neuron tracts going from the cerebrum to either the head or the lower body via the pons. And then, of course, in the back, we can see the tectum. And in this section, we can only see the superior colliculi. This whole is the aqueduct of the midbrain, connecting the third and the fourth ventricle. Okay, and of course, we can see the medial lemniscus. Half the medial lemniscus is the axons of second-order neurons heading to the thalamus. Of course, they have to pass through the midbrain. And we can see the oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve 3 in this picture. Okay, so the functional region is conveying motor impulses, it's relaying sensory information, and then of course it regulates the auditory and visual reflexes. Okay, let's take a break. Work it up, walk around until 10 o'clock.